Welcome back to the channel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa.Taylor-Austin, licensed psychotherapist and expert witness. And today in this video, we'll be talking about covert narcissism. My special guest today is Mia Hanks. She is purposefully not being shown to protect her anonymity. She is the author of a book called Bridemaid, a memoir. So we're going to talk with her a little bit about that book and then a little bit about covert narcissism. Thanks so much for joining us, Mia.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really think that what you have to say is going to be helpful to a lot of people.
I hope so, yes.
Talk with us first about your book. My understanding is that it's not like a chronological story, but it's written a little bit differently.
Yeah, correct. It is I guess I'll first explain how the book came to be. When I left my 29-year marriage with a covert narcissist, I was searching for I wanted to learn as much as I could about narcissism. And everything that I found was either it seemed to be written by a therapist or a psychologist, and it was all very academic. I was searching for something that was an insider point of view. I
Mhm.
wanted to know from someone else's perspective, what a day to day life with narcissists looked like. And I couldn't find that. So I decided to write a memoir. And basically, it just begins at the beginning of our relationship when we met, and it's just told in a series of short stories that goes all the way through 29 years of marriage and all the way through my divorce. So yeah, I'm hoping that it will help other people recognize what narcissism is and just provide just some education about narcissism and specifically covert narcissism.
Yes. And, I'm with you on this because there isn't much written about covert narcissism in the DSM, which is the book that therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists use to diagnose people. There is one sentence about covert narcissism. And so I think the disservice is I'm not sure how many people, even in the helping professions, are really that versed in it. Not because they aren't smart, not because they didn't pay attention in school, but because they didn't learn about it.
Correct. And there is a real problem when you're dealing with therapists because a lot of therapists don't know about covert narcissism. And if you get suckered into going to marriage counseling with a covert narcissist, it never ends well. Because oftentimes the narcissist gets the therapist on their side
Yeah,
because the therapist just isn't, they're not real in tune to the covert aspect. We think of narcissism as being this real pompous, arrogant person, but that's not how a covert narcissist presents. And oftentimes, when we use the word narcissism or call someone a narcissist, we're using that word incorrectly. Just because someone is overconfident or overly arrogant doesn't mean they're a narcissist. It's a completely different thing.
right. And coverts have a very different presentation. And some of my other videos on this channel, I've talked about how they're like chameleons, where they will behave and act and present themselves as different people to different people.
Yes, they
And
do.
and I'm wondering in your marriage, if you saw that firsthand, I want to just clarify, it almost looks like someone with multiple personality disorder, or what's now called DID, when you're very close to a covert narcissist, right? You'll go places with them and they all of a sudden they're acting like a different person and you're thinking, what is this? Did you
Uh,
see that?
yes, I did. Now, I wouldn't say that my ex had different types of personalities. He sort of had his personality that he showed to the outside world, and then he had his personality behind closed doors at home. And those were two vastly different personalities. So the problem that you run into as a victim is that to the outside world, this covert narcissist is humble, they're kind, they're generous, they're extremely empathetic, and they present as the perfect husband, the perfect father, this all around wonderful human being. Well, as a victim, this isn't true. And then when it comes time, you decide to leave this marriage, this relationship, it's very hard to get people to believe you because
Yes,
they've only seen this wonderful, I mean, there's no way this man could be abusive. And also, as a victim, and I think other victims would probably agree with this, we spend a lot of our time protecting that image that the covert is trying to show the world. I think we spend a lot of time covering for them, making excuses for them, um, which makes it doubly hard to convince somebody later on that, yeah, this person is abusive, because not only was he showing himself to be this great guy, but I was sort of perpetuating this lie along with him. So it is a very complicated, it's a complicated matter when it comes time to trying to build that support system, because people don't want to believe you.
right. And I think also too, for the intimate partner, it's hard for them to see it. So other people, friends, family members, coworkers even might be saying to them, do you think that this relationship is healthy for you? And the intimate partner is thinking, my partner's wonderful. What are you talking about? And I think it's very hard. There's like a Stockholm syndrome that happens
It
when we're
is.
in relationship with a covert narcissist.
Yeah, definitely. And you hear the word trauma bond. And that's a popular word amongst when we're talking about narcissists and relationships with narcissists. But really a trauma bond is Stockholm syndrome. That's exactly
Yes.
what it is. And I think, I definitely knew there was a problem. The only people in my circle that saw it were my parents. And they did call it out to me and say, hey, I just, we don't think this is, something's not right here. But I think I was so conditioned from such an early age, because I had been with him since I was 21 years old. I was so conditioned to make excuses for him, to cover for him, and to make everybody think that we had the perfect life. And so I did that, and it was that trauma bond. It was, and those are hard to break. It's really hard to admit to yourself that no, this is not healthy, this is not right, and I shouldn't be here. I think we all, we want our marriages to work, and we from my perspective, looking back, I mean, I was lying to myself. But at the time, I guess I felt like I needed to do that to preserve this image. So it was just a complicated mess for sure.
That's understandable to me because coverts in particular do something that's called the shared fantasy. So they size you up, they figure out what you've been missing from your life and what you've always wanted, and then they provide that to you. But you're thinking, oh, this is who the person really is. And so you get sucked into what's called this shared fantasy, where only the two of you are living out this relationship and this type of interaction. And they might be presenting themselves as a person other than who they really are to you. And the shared fantasy feels like you met your soulmate. And it feels like this is the person I've always been waiting for. Did you have that feeling early on? I know you were young when you got married.
Yeah, I didn't, I'm not sure that I understood really who I was getting involved with. I
Of course.
was I was 19 when I met him. And yeah, I think kind of what you're describing also is the love bombing part of it too, where they present as this person you've always wanted, right? And they give you all this attention, and you just think there's no way that someone who gives me all this attention and these nice gifts and these grand gestures. Everything is done in grand fashion. There's no way that this person doesn't really love me. And you do think that, and you think, wow, this is just too good to be true. And if you think it's too good to be true, probably it is. So that was my experience. And the love bombing phase, that doesn't last. They do that, they get you hooked in. You really think you found this great person who wants to spend their life with you. But really, we know that narcissists aren't truly capable of loving. And so it didn't take too long before I realized that I was started to see red flags. Yeah.
It's a really good explanation there. We know that covert narcissists gaslight and stonewall, and they project their own shortcomings and behaviors onto their partner. Talk with us a little bit about what being married to a covert narcissist was like. Now, I assume for most of this time, you weren't aware that, hey, my husband's a covert narcissist, because it can take years, sometimes decades, for a partner to figure this out.
Yeah, for me, definitely it was decades. Um, I was gaslit, really from day one. And what that kind of looked like was if I had an issue with something he said to me or something he did to me, for example, and I brought that up to him, his response would never be to apologize or feel bad or empathize and say, oh, that must have really hurt your feelings. Instead, his response would be, well, there must be something wrong with you because you're too sensitive, and a normal person wouldn't have had that reaction. You're overly dramatic. You are blowing this out of proportion, and when you're being told this day after day, you really do start to believe that. Yeah, I think there's something wrong with me. I'm not reacting the way a normal person should. I am too sensitive. And so for decades, people can believe that they are the problem when they're not. It's that projection, and my ex-husband would often, very often, accuse me of being selfish. Well, I was anything but. I was giving up everything for him. But he would call me selfish. And I can even remember a time or two, he even used the word narcissist, which, is very odd, but it's that projection. They will take their shortcomings and accuse you of being those things when it's really them. So you have to wonder, do they know it's them and they're so ashamed that they are projecting it onto someone else? But definitely I dealt with that on a daily basis.
He called you the narcissist.
Yeah, I mean, he did use that word more than once. Now, that was before I knew that I was actually dealing with a narcissist. It was almost like, he was giving me, it was a bit of foreshadowing. And they say oftentimes when a narcissist is calling you out on something, what they're really doing is they're confessing. So
Yes.
it is odd that now that I think back, yeah, he did use that word, and that was before I really started exploring narcissism.
I think what happens oftentimes with the partner, whether the partner is, any gender partner, right? They start to then fawn. So they really, if we talk about trauma, there's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Those are the four main ones. And I
Yes.
think what happens is that the partner starts to fawn over the narcissist, and they want to make them happy. And if I try harder, and if I do this a different way, if I'm a little better in this particular area, I'll make them happy. And then we won't have these problems.
That's exactly, when you look at those 4 trauma responses, my response every single time was the fawn response. And so my feeling was, right, if I could just be a little bit better, if I could be a little bit more of what he wanted, we wouldn't have these issues. And it wasn't about, you start giving up yourself because it's not about what you want. It's about what will make them happy, what will keep the peace, and what will keep them untriggered. And that's what your life becomes, so you're walking on eggshells all the time. And some people will even say, and I can relate to this, that you almost rehearse what you're going to say before you say it, so that you don't trigger them. You think, well, how should I present this? What should I say? And if you're rehearsing conversation in your head, it's a red flag.
Yes, I'm really, really glad you brought that up. I don't hear that mentioned very often. That's very common. And the whole focus that the partner has is on the narcissist. They forget about themselves. They forget about what they like, what makes them happy. They're constantly trying to please the narcissist.
Yeah, and it's like people pleasing on steroids, right?
Yes.
It's more than people pleasing. It's actually giving up who you are and forgetting what you ever wanted, or what your dreams are, what your goals are. None of that matters. None of it matters. It's only about, and in my situation, later on in my marriage, it was more about just making it to the next day. You know, just making this day work, so that we would have as little conflict as possible, and just making it through to the next day. And that's a terrible way to live, but at the same time it was my normal. It was what I was accustomed to. And I realized, looking back now, well, how did I do that? How did I stay? But you normalize it, and you tell yourself, everybody lives like this. Well, of course they don't, but that's how I think a lot of times it's a coping mechanism.
Right. I also think that the narcissist slowly entrains us to accept it.
They do. They
And
do.
so,
Yes.
it's insidious with a covert. So you don't really see that that's what's happening because it's like dripping water almost.
Hmm.
It drips and drips and drips, and then it all adds up and you find yourself in this situation.
Yeah. And for me, the stress that walking on eggshells and trying not to trigger him, that stress really took a toll on my body physically. I
Yes.
was dealing with chronic pain, stomach aches, headaches, major lack of sleep. I mean, extreme sleep deprivation. And after a while, your body can only take so much of that level of stress, and being so tense all the time. I was so tense all the time. And yeah, that was eventually what made me realize I've got to do something. I've got to figure out what's going on. And I can't, it's not sustainable to live like this. So it
No,
will
it's
catch up
not.
with you. Yeah.
Right. And many people do become very sick, even with very serious illnesses like cancer or lupus or things like that when they stay in these long-term relationships with a covert.
Yeah, I can definitely see. I mean, I was headed that way. I'm dealing with, I mean, I was having some mobility issues due to chronic pain. And everything was just, I think your body just is not built for that level of stress for that long. It's one thing to be in a stressful situation, but not day after day after day, year after year. And so it's just at some point you have to decide, how is this sustainable? And really the answer is it's not. You really do. You don't have a choice. You've got to get out.
Right. Because you are living with emotional abuse
Yeah,
day in and day out. Some people also have to cope with physical or sexual abuse that goes along with it. And
right.
there's other types of abuse as well, like financial abuse.
Financial abuse is huge. And I think that's something that we don't talk about. People don't realize that that is such a major issue, and a reason why a lot of women victims specifically end up staying with these partners for decades, and a lot of times not even getting out, never getting out. Because if you're with a narcissist, more than likely they are controlling 100% of the finances. And the bottom line is, leaving requires money. You have to have money to get out. You have to have a place to stay. You have to be able to buy groceries. And if they have 100% control of the money, it makes it really difficult for the victim to even, even ponder trying to get out. And I think a lot of times they end up staying.
Yes. And there's also, I think, a true fear factor. So the partner's thinking about maybe I should leave, but they're so afraid of what the narcissist is going to do. Because some of the things that they do, like a smear campaign or stalking or calling your boss and giving your boss false information about you, are very detrimental.
Yeah, they'll do all of those things, and it is very scary because for a narcissist, being told no is not in their playbook. That's just not how they roll, and they don't accept the word no. So when you leave, definitely it's a scary thing because you are, rejecting them. You're telling them no, and you don't really know how they're going to react. They're not the most stable type of people. So there definitely is a fear factor there. And another thing I think people don't talk about a lot is there's an embarrassment factor too.
Yes,
For me, I was in this marriage for 29 years. It's embarrassing, really, to have to go and admit that, first of all, I put up with this for 29 years. That it's embarrassing. It really is. And so I think a lot of people, we want everyone to think that we've got it all together, that everything's great. And so to have to go and admit that we don't have it together and we've been living this crazy life for, decades, it's hard. It's really hard.
it is very hard. The other thing, and we talked about this earlier, is that this trauma bond is very similar to heroin addiction, literally.
Yeah.
So, this trauma bond of intermittent reinforcement, where the narcissist is loving you and then devaluing you and then loving you, it's intermittent, it's back and forth. It's very much the same type of brain response that drug addicts have when they're trying to get their drug. So, they get their drug, they get high. So that would be like the love bombing, right? And
Right.
then later the high wears off, and then they're searching for that drug again, even though that drug makes them sick, makes them throw up. It's the same thing with being literally addicted to this covert narcissist. They've developed this intermittent pattern of getting you reliant on them and attached to them. So part of the leaving that's difficult too is I think people say to themselves, how am I going to live without this person?
Yeah. The narcissist wants you to be dependent on them.
Hmm.
And so any act of independence is definitely frowned upon. My ex-husband didn't want me to have any independence at all. And so the trauma bond, yeah, and that's interesting. You talk about it being like a drug addiction. It is because they will mistreat you so badly, but only to a certain point. And they realize when they've almost hit that limit, it's time to reel you back in. So
Yes.
then you might get a really nice gift just out of the blue. Here, you're so wonderful. I bought you this expensive gift. And then you think, well, I think maybe they do love me and maybe this is a good marriage. And then it just starts to slowly crumble and the mistreatment and it's a real insidious way to treat somebody. But that's what they're good at.
They're very good at it and fooling everybody on the outside the whole time, looking like Mr. or Miss Nice Guy, right?
Always, yes. And interesting about narcissists, at least with my ex-husband, and I think this is very typical, he loved to give gifts, but he liked to give them in front of other people. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
the gift wasn't really for me, it was for his image. So he
Yes,
loved to do these grand gestures and these wonderful gifts in front of other people so they would look at him and say, "Oh, what a wonderful husband he is." And it just furthers this false narrative that they're living.
right. I don't mean to embarrass you, so if you don't want to answer this question or talk about this topic, that's fine, and we'll just move along. But one
Okay.
thing I don't hear talked about is lack of intimacy. And so I want to kind of share with you what my thought is about this. Covert narcissists usually don't like touching other people or being touched. They don't like holding hands. They're not somebody who's going to, put their arm around you, hey, baby, and give you a kiss. They're very kind of stay away from me. And I think even in sexual relationships, there's like this distance or wall where they're not really there. Was your husband like romantic? Did he hold your hand and do those kind of gestures for you?
He did, but looking back, it wasn't genuine. There is, when you talk about that disconnect, you can't really connect with a narcissist. They are just not, for one thing, they lack empathy. They have no empathy. And so you can only get so close to them. They're just, it's almost like, I don't want to say like they're not human, but there's just some human qualities that they're missing. So to form a real bond or a real connection with them is impossible. And with a narcissist, everything just feels very like a show, like it's fake, like it's a movie or a TV show. It's not real. And I think that's because they just don't have real feelings. And it's sad, you think, why is that? And of course, it all oftentimes goes back to trauma in their own childhood. But yeah, they're just very, I guess the word is phony, right? They don't tend to have normal feelings like a neurotypical person would.
I would agree with that. I think they're absent, like there's nobody there almost. And
Correct.
and the way that they interact with other people, it's learned behavior. It's almost like, oh, I'm the covert narcissist. Oh, that person's crying. I need to tell them I hope that they feel better and offer them a tissue. So let me do it. But it's not coming from a place of wanting to do it or just feeling it.
Yeah,
Um,
I would agree. Definitely. They don't feel it, but they can observe and they can learn how they're supposed to respond. And so it looks like they're responding like a normal person should, but there's no heart behind it. I guess
yeah,
that's the difference.
I agree with that 100%. And I think that goes back to their early childhood and their toddler years, where when a young child doesn't get to individuate and separate from their birth parent, they're stuck in this cycle of a relationship where they're trying to constantly get away from their birth parent and individuate. So all of us learn and figure out, hey, I'm my own person, I'm an individual. Narcissists aren't able to do that because of the way their parents are treating them. So what a lot of them do, they actually carry around in their mind as toddlers like a movie of their mom or their dad, and they interact with the movie in their mind. And my belief is that they take that forward into their life, and their whole life is a movie.
Yeah,
And
I can definitely see that. Yeah.
yeah, and then we just become like the ancillary actors and actresses, but they're the star.
Right, and everything is just at its core, everything is fake. Um, I have heard that for narcissists, of course, nobody is born a narcissist; they're created. And one thing I've heard is there is a common thread amongst people who are diagnosed NPD, and that thread is that there was some sort of neglect in their childhood. In my ex-husband's case, it would be emotional neglect. His emotional needs were not met as a child, just due to his upbringing and personality types in his household. And so I definitely see that, and I guess they form these kind of walls around them so as not to get hurt, maybe. But yeah, definitely there's neglect and that kind of precipitates this narcissism. But yeah, everything is kind of like you said, and I think in their minds, everything plays out like a movie.
Yeah, and that's why they treat us the way they do, where they put us on a pedestal, then devalue us, then put us back on a pedestal and then devalue us, because that's what happened to them
Yeah.
in their early toddler years. They learned that.
Yeah.
And so
Interesting.
I
Yes.
think to them, that's what love is.
I think it is as well. And but for the victim, that cycle, that continual cycle is absolutely exhausting.
It is.
And I think for victims of narcissistic abuse, I think if you asked, you know, however many people, what one word would you use to describe your relationship with the narcissist? I bet most of them would say exhausting. Because it is.
Yes,
It
it
is.
is. So, talk with us a little, Mia, about how you were able to get out. Number one, I think you didn't tell me this, but I think you probably had to plan. So, let's start with that and talk with us about how you kind of went about it, or tips maybe that you might have for other people to go about it.
Definitely, you have to plan, and I think I didn't realize how much planning was required. If I had it to do over again, I would have planned better. But yeah, I realized I needed to get out. We were actually in marriage counseling, and it was his decision to be in marriage counseling. Narcissists love to go to therapy, and you don't want to go to therapy with a narcissist. Anyhow, we were seeing a therapist who actually was well versed in narcissism, and she was able to recognize, probably about 8 sessions in, that this was not a good thing. And after maybe 8 or 9 sessions, she literally kicked him out of therapy. She said, I can't help you. You're not, you're just, it's not, this is not fixable. And at that point I realized, wow, this is bad. I need to go. Um, what I did, I had my parents that lived near me, and I ended up just moving in with my parents. I realize a lot of people don't have that, but so I was really lucky. But I wouldn't say I planned it as much as I just realized I've got to go,
Mm.
but I did it slowly. I didn't just drop a bomb and say I'm leaving. I would go and stay at my parents' a couple nights a week, and then I would come back, and I kind of went back and forth, and then ultimately I just told him I need some time away. And of course, I knew when I did that I was not coming back, but I didn't let him think that. So it was kind of a gradual move out. But as far as, people out there that are in these relationships and they need to get out, the first thing you've got to do is start setting aside money. Um, because that's the first thing my ex-husband did when he realized I was leaving. He drained the bank account. And they will do that because they know that it's a way to potentially get you to come back. So,
It's control.
it's control. It's control. But yeah, you really do need to think things through. You've got to figure out where you're going to go. Do you have money that, you can buy food, and are you going to go to a hotel? What are you going to do? You really need to think it through. And the narcissist is very effective at trying to get you to come back. And
Yeah.
that's the hardest part.
And there are little tricks that people can do if they don't have money. And I'll post a link to that particular video where I talk about those things in the description to this one below. But I've heard you talk about it too. Like, for example, when you go to the grocery store, oftentimes you can buy yourself a gift card that
Yes.
and you're buying it for the grocery store, but you're squirreling it away to use it later. Or
Yes.
you can do cash back. So if your groceries were 100, you ask them to put it through for 140 and you keep the $40. So if you're doing that consistently over time, you can save up money, believe it or not.
You really can, and it seems like a minor thing, but yeah, that's one of my tips is when you go to the grocery store every time, get cash back because it's not something that's easily traceable. It's not going to be obvious that you're trying to squirrel away money. And of course, gift cards are fantastic too. So those are ways that really it will add up over time. Another thing is retrieving your personal documents. Things like that. You know, the narcissist is going to make it next to impossible for you to get things like that. They're going to put up a fight. So, you know, set aside your birth certificate, your passport, all these things that you need to have in your possession before you leave. So, because they decide that once the narcissist realizes that you are leaving, they pull out all the stops.
Right. And I would recommend giving copies of those documents to someone you can trust so that they're not even in your house.
That's a good idea.
Another thing I think that's very important is don't tell the narcissist you're leaving. Like, don't announce this.
No, absolutely not. It's because then they have time to do all sorts of things. I know that, um, you know, if I had told my ex-husband I was leaving, there's no telling. He probably would have orchestrated some big intervention that would have caused me to stay. So you really do have to stay quiet about what you're doing, but you also need to kind of be setting up a support system so that when you get out, you've got at least, you know, one or two people that can help you out because getting out on your own is, you know, it's a tall order. You really do need some outside help.
You got very lucky finding a therapist who knows about narcissism. My guess is he took you there to convince you that you were the narcissist, but she was smart
Yes.
enough and she figured it out.
Yes, I mean, we every session he did all the talking. And I just sat there and took it all in, and I, you know, I was just baffled. But it was he made it very obvious that he was the one that had the problem. And unfortunately, this was a therapist that couldn't be charmed by his, you know, fake charm, and she did figure it out. So, but yeah, he took me there to fix me. That was his whole goal, to fix me. And the therapist just wasn't having any of it. So I did get lucky. Yes.
That's good. And it does take someone usually, well, the average person, it takes them 7 attempts to try to get out of this narcissistic relationship. So if someone's watching this and they're thinking, I already tried, it didn't work, what would be your response to that?
I think you've got to try again. I mean, it's just not sustainable to stay with these people. They're going to get the best of you, and it's just you're not being fair to yourself, you know. And I know it is hard to leave, and I think it's even harder to leave a second time and a third time. Once you go back the first time, you've let them win, you know, and in their mind, they got you back once, they'll get you back again. So I think it is harder to get out the second time, but it's doable and it's necessary. It's necessary for your health.
I agree with you. I'm very impressed listening to you. You've really educated yourself very well about this topic. So I think the reading you did and different people that you talked to and reflecting on a lot of this has been really helpful to you. And I know that's a very daunting process and it's a very emotionally just upheaval really to try to teach yourself about these things when you're learning about it in relationship to a person that you love or once loved.
Yeah, it is. And it's, you know, you learn about this and you read about it. And at the time, I just didn't realize anyone else was going through this. And that sounds crazy that, you know, of course there are other people going through what you're going through, but I just didn't believe it at the time. And after trying to really educate myself on the topic, I realize how prevalent this is. And there are so many people in the same situation. It's just overwhelming to me how many people are not just in the situation, but effectively trapped. It's
Mhm.
a scary thing when you think about it. But yeah, I mean, if you're out there and you're in one of these relationships, just know that you are not alone. There are way too many people that are facing these same issues day after day.
I just want to let viewers know Mia is not my client and she never was my client, but I very much appreciate her joining us so we could talk about this topic because every day in my work, I talk with potential clients who are wondering, I think I might be in a relationship with a narcissist. So I very much, Mia, appreciate you joining us and talking with us about your experience.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope hope it's been helpful to people out there.
Yes, and if this video was helpful to you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video because you never know who you might be helping. Take care.